Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Cinemacast. If my voice sounds a little off, I apologize ahead in advance. I spent the last couple of weeks with a very bad cold, and I'm getting over laryngitis, which, of course, the cold led to that. And my voice is starting to come back to full form. I'm actually able to talk. I just got a cough, and it's a phlegm to, cough up. But, that's when it comes to seasonal changes, it happens. And of course, speaking of seasonal, it is the Halloween season. Halloween season is upon us. It's finally October. And kicking off this Halloween season, what better way to do our first review in October with Saw 10, or Saw X as it's called. Now, you remember in the 2000s when every sequel entry to this franchise came out, and they always played the trailer on TV. The narrator's always like, if it's Halloween, it must be Saw. And goddammit, once again, another Saw entry in the franchise. God, the franchise is almost 20 years old. The first Saw came out in 2004, which was directed by James Wan. James Wan, he's a pretty good director. He can be. He's had some good movies. He's had some bad movies. And I'm looking at his movie library right now, what he did. He did, looks like he wrote, produced, and directed a lot of, and pretty much every Saw he had some kind of, he has something to do with. He did the Insidious movies. He did the Conjuring movies. He did Furious 7, which is probably maybe the best in the franchise since the first and second movie. But he's known a lot for a lot of the, most recent horror movies. And a lot of the Conjuring series. He directed Aquaman. He was producer on The Nun 2. That will be another episode in the future for The Nun, because I recently watched it and I do got some things to say about it. But this movie today, Saw X, is not just a continuation of the franchise. Oh no. This movie takes place in between Saw and Saw 2. Now, in case you've never really seen the movies or you don't know much about the movies, basically you have this guy, his name is John Kramer, played by Tobin Bell. Does a really good job with it. He does a fantastic job with the movie. Tobin Bell does. And he plays the role of Jigsaw. Well, his name is John Kramer in the movie, but he plays a Jigsaw killer. And in each movie, he has a tendency to kidnap certain people and chain them up in certain situations, and thus giving them an option. It's usually led by a recorded tape that they play on a little tape recorder. And it's always directed at certain persons. And they give them a choice. You got 60 seconds, or you got till this time to make your decision or die or die where you sit at. Now, when this movie came out and I seen Saw, I'm like, okay, Saw. When you look at the movie, when you look at the poster, you see a severed hand below a handsaw. And of course, that's what happens in the first movie. The one of the victims, he ends up sawing his foot off to get out of a shackle. So it's like, how much blood are you willing to lose or sacrifice to get yourself out of a situation? To save yourself, to save others. But as the franchise goes on, each movie is different tests for different subjects. And each movie, each test gets more grotesque and more gory. Even in one of the entries, you have the pit in the pendulum trap, where the victim has an opportunity to get out, does try to get out, but is locked in it, and thus is killed off. And it's by one of the suspects, which is not the Jigsaw killer. It's somebody who was working alongside him. but takes things a little bit too far. He doesn't really just test his victims. He kills them as well. But that's what goes on with these movies. You know, they kidnap certain victims. And then during the movies, each victim has a piece of the puzzle that gets put together with everybody else. Everybody's linked together somehow. And they're all linked toward Jigsaw. They're linked to the other killers. They're linked to each other. There's always something very clever with the plot. And now a lot of people will sit there and talk about how there's too many movies in this franchise, too many entries in this franchise to even count or even look at or watch. Each movie adds something new, adds some new character, some new group of people, some new storyline. But what's clever about each movie is they all tie together one way or another. Even the last entry, Saw 3D, which was Saw 7, was supposed to be the final one. That linked the very first character that you see, or one of the first characters you see in the whole franchise, played by Carrie Elway. You see him return in there. And he ends up as one of the proteges of Jigsaw. That was a big twist for the supposed last entry. Now, when it comes to horror movies, anybody should know, when it comes to horror movies, when there's a final chapter to something, when something finally ends, it never truly ends, does it? If you got a distribution company, or if you got a production studios, or any kind of movie studio, or you got directors or producers or whatever, who see potential for a reboot, a sequel, a prequel, anything to cash off of, cash in on. A lot of these franchises are money cows, or cash cows. That's what I don't know why I say money cow. They're cash cows. That's what franchises like this is. It's a cash cow. How much money can you milk off of it to add a new story to it, to make it almost original, but still stick with the formula of the plot, the formula of the storyline? Look at Friday the 13th. When Friday the 13th came out in the 80s, Part 1, you heard about the little boy Jason who drowned in the lake, and all the careless camp counselors who failed to watch him. Who went on the murderous killing spree? You don't find out till the end. Turns out to be Jason's mother. Boy, I hope I didn't spoil that for anybody. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, if you have not yet to watch Friday the 13th, the original 1980 movie, what's wrong with you? I'm joking. Not a lot of people care about horror movies nowadays. But, Friday the 13th, the first movie, Jason's mom ends up killing. And of course, she meets her maker at the end. And you got that one lone survivor that survives. And then part 2 comes out. Now, it's still just a couple years pass or whatever. Now you got Jason who comes back to life. This is a boy who drowned in a lake. How can he come back to life? How can he survive for so many years out there in them woods after being presumed drowned dead? You don't know. You don't find out. Jason comes back. You know what? That's a plot hole within itself that I may have to cover on another show. How does Jason come back every time? This is a boy who had a very mentally retarded physical condition. He was mentally retarded. He had a major physical mutation with him as a child. That's why he was bullied at camp. That's why, he was bullied. He was pressured. He was drowned. Pushed in the water. The kids drowned him. They were little bastards. The camp counselors didn't do shit. But each entry in a franchise can either get more ridiculous with a plot or get better with either the story or maybe the kills. Jason, he has many different ways of killing people. Many different ways. And then you get to part 4, the final chapter. They kill Jason off. End of Friday the 13th. But more and more movies are seen going on and on and on. You know, like Nightmare on Elm Street keeps going. Halloween keeps going. I'm pretty sure there was something else that kept going. I don't remember. But, you know, Friday the 13th came back. Part 5. This time you had a copycat killer. You know, you had a copycat killer. That didn't work out too well. I mean, it was a good movie in a sense if you really liked it. But they figured, okay, we brought the series back. Let's do something ridiculous now. Part 6. Let's have the character Tommy from the previous 2 chapters. Let's have him come back. And with a spark of sense, goes to the graveyard where Jason is laid to rest. During a thunderstorm. Some freak accident happens. Jason's brought back to life. He's a fucking zombie monster. Now he's power walking. He's not running or sprinting anymore. He's power walking. He's still fast as shit. But each movie after that, you know, the kills get more hilarious and more grotesque. There's more comedy involved with it. It's almost like you can't take the movie serious anymore. But at one point, it does come to an end. But with Saw tries to reinvent itself every time. In my opinion, it tries to reinvent itself with each new movie. But it always ties to something. It always ties together somehow. And then you get to the last entry, and everything ties together. It's almost like putting a necklace together or a bracelet. You add pieces to the string that makes no sense. Different pieces. Until you tie it together, you loop it together, it's like, oh, it does fit. One way or another, it does fit together. It fits the spectrum. And that's what these movies try to do. You know, they try to fit one long storyline within 7 or 8 movies. And some of them, well, they have that continuity to it. But then there's others where you're like, what happened to this person? What happened to that person? But then you find out later on, you know? But Saw X just came out. Just in time for Halloween, right? Just in time for the Halloween season. Just came out. And as I said, this entry takes place between Saw and Saw 2. Now, how is it that you take a movie like this and you fit it in between 2 movies that came out nearly 20 years ago? When one of the actors, Shawnee Smith, who plays the girl Amanda, the protege Amanda. Remember back in the day when you did watch these movies, how young she looked? She was so fucking young. How old is she now? Right, she's 54. Okay, she was in her 30s when she did it. When you look at her now in this movie, she looks like she aged. And I mean aged. Like, I know a lot of movies now, they'll add some CG effect to it to make people look younger or look a different way, you know, to add some continuity or something. Like, look at Star Wars. With Star Wars, they brought back Mark Hamill in The Mandalorian and all, and they did a CG effect on him. Look at the sequel movies. You know, what was the last one? Not The Last Jedi, but the one after that, where they had CG Carrie Fisher after she had passed away. You know, CG has become such a thing today in movies. Like, not a whole lot of movies use practical effects anymore. Why not? I'd rather watch a movie, especially a horror movie, that has practical effects over CG. CG should be used for something that's impossible to do. Impossible. That, or maybe an animated movie. But when you add too much CG to a live action movie and overdo it, it makes it look like shit. It makes it look like a complete shit. Practical effects is where it's at because you know there's a team behind what they're doing. And they do a goddamn fantastic good job with it. Main example, Tom Savini. Look at the work that Tom Savini did back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He does some amazing practical effects when it comes to horror movies. Especially movies like Dawn of the Dead, the original Dawn of the Dead that came out in the 70s. He's done some amazing work. That's where the movie would come in and really take its course. If you have practical effects over CG. CG is something that kills movies off at times. Look at all the Marvel movies, all 20 or 30 of them. All CG related. About 95% of those goddamn movies are CG. Yes, I do enjoy a good Marvel movie. I've seen about 97% of them. But I'm just saying, CGI has taken over as the standard in movies. With how we watch movies, you know, it's almost like they're easier to put together. You can CG a whole movie in 2 months. Put everything together, slap it together, do some chroma effects and the green screen effects, whatever, put it together. Boom, you got a movie that's out within 3 months. The way movies have come out nowadays compared to 30 years ago, completely different. Completely different. We'll cover that in another episode. But talking about Saw today, so this movie, how do you take a movie like this and fit it in between 2 movies? Especially when, like I said, the one character, Amanda, played by Shawnee Smith, she looks so aged in this movie. Now, you could probably say, well, it's maybe because of the drugs. Yeah, that's true. She was a drug addict in the movie. A recovering drug addict. Jigsaw, John Kramer saved her life. He put her in his tests. He tested her. And she came out alive. She owed her life to him. Because to her, he saved her life. So she became his protege in his movies. But you didn't really find out about that until Saw 2. Or at least Saw 3. She was always a victim in the first 2 Saw movies. But here's where a little continuity error comes in play. Okay, she is the protege in this one. She helps John with the test subjects. She helps kidnap him, right? But then when you get to Saw 2, she's locked in this warehouse with different rooms with this all new group of people, right? And you know she's the victim in the movie. You have no idea that she's working with Saul or Jigsaw. You have no idea she's working with John. She's just another victim. It's not until maybe the end of Saw 2 or into Saw 3 where you find out that she is a protege of John Kramer. So that's one little loophole with this movie. That's one little plot hole that really gets me. Is that, yeah, she's a protege. Everybody knows she's a protege, but why is she in this movie? Why is her character resurrected? One knows. It's a plot hole. So that's one little problem I do have with the movie is they add her character back. But there's a continuity error with it. If you're going to take place between Saul and Saul 2, you got to have the story set straight. And I think that's number one thing where this movie kind of fails at a little bit is the continuity error with it. Like I said, you bring back Amanda, his protege, the character, is one of the other popular characters in the franchise that people love. People loved Amanda. People love John Kramer. Maybe people love Detective Hoffman from Saw 3, 4, and on up, But this movie, let's get into the synopsis, okay? And I'm not going to try to spoil so much of it, but I know it's going to be a spoiler for you. So like I always say with these episodes, if you have not watched this movie yet, go see it, then come back and watch the review. So with this movie, and as you go into watching the first 3 Saw movies, John Kramer was dying from a brain cancer. He had an advanced brain cancer. He was dying from cancer. So, with not much time left, he took it to some quote unquote hobbies of his, which was, he was an architect. He was building traps. He built Billy the Doll. He built the bicycle for him. But also he saw potential in people that were toxic. People who did bad things, whether it was to him or somebody else. But John always had a way of teaching people a lesson. And they were in the most grotesque way, but he would call it almost as like a rebirth. You deserve a second chance. Let's see if you're worthy of it. So he puts you in these traps, and he gives you a time limit. But before the time limit starts, he tells you what the trap is. Tells you what you got to do to get out of it. And of course, there's going to be a sacrifice of some kind. There's always going to be like body limb being severed, some part of the body being broken, anything of that nature. Even if it's blood, if you end up losing a lot of blood, if you got to sacrifice blood for something, there's always some kind of sacrificial item that's required of the human body. Now, if you can't complete that task within 60 seconds, you're dead. So within those 60 seconds, you gotta fucking die hard or die trying. And I don't even think I even really said that right. Die hard or die trying. Jesus Christ. You gotta really try hard or die trying. There we go. Let's do that. I had to think there for a second. I'm still sick. Remember that. You gotta try hard or die trying. That's what these traps are basically set up as. So with this movie here, going back in between both movies, he's still in the middle of trying to figure out, he's still visiting doctors, he's trying to find the best physicians to take care of his brain cancer. He only has months left to live. At the beginning of the movie, after he has a CT scan done, he happens to witness a custodian that was stealing items from a patient in the room next door. Now, the very first trap that you see, now when you look at the poster, the movie poster, and you're really expecting to see this trap in full glory, right? Well, you do. It was in the first 5 minutes of the movie. But it's not even real. He's imagining putting this guy in this trap. And of course, there is a little video on YouTube you can look up about that trap, and it doesn't give you a whole lot to it. It just gives you a taste of what to expect. But this trap, it's unique. Each trap that he does is fresh and new. I'll give him that. This one may not be as grotesque as every other trap that you see in any of the other franchises. It's a start. Because mind you, John Kramer was just starting out. This takes place right after Saw 1. So, of course, this trap is not going to be the grandest of them all. Does this guy live or die? Well, I'm going to leave that to you. But just remember that this trap is it's imagination. John's thinking about putting this guy in the trap. But after the custodian sees John in the window, he puts the belongings back in the drawer and he takes off. John looks at him and says, "Good choice." So after all this happens, okay, John, he attends it's like an AA meeting. It's a cancer support meeting that he attends. He meets several different people who have gone through different diagnoses, who have a certain amount of time to live. Apologize for that, guys. So, at some point later, he encounters one of the guys from the meeting who claims to have been cured by an experimental cancer treatment conducted by some group that is led by a doctor. So he gives him a website to go to, and John looks it up, gives him a call, and he schedules an appointment to go out to Mexico. It's down in Mexico City. So John goes all the way down here. He flies down here, he's prepping himself. He's getting a lay of the land. He's meeting all these people. But he's also taking into effect the people that he's meeting and everything seems to be set up in a certain way that's kind of odd for him to meet these people. But the story is just explained to him in such a way where it's like, never mind what you saw. Never mind what you saw. Let's continue on with this. Don't mind about that. Don't mind that. Just mind this. That's basically what's going on. So, after the big meet and greet with everybody, and he's like, okay, let's get ready to do it tomorrow. So the next day, he's prepped. He's on the operating table. He's watching a video while he's still awake of somebody doing the surgery on his brain, or at least it looks like it, and then they put him under. Next thing you know, he wakes up. Doctor comes in and tells him the procedure was successful. We got it. We're gonna send you home with medication. You're gonna feel a little bit of pain here and there. After a while. This and that. At this point, John, he feels grateful. He feels grateful for what they've done. So before leaving, he decides to go into town, buy a couple things for one of the girls that work there. Comes back, wanting to thank them all. But then, when he comes back, he notices something. Everybody's gone. The whole facility is abandoned. Nobody's around. None of the doctors, nothing. Then he discovers something. Turns out they botched his surgery. They ended up botching his surgery. They never did surgery on him. John ended up paying thousands of dollars to this group to do this surgery, and it never occurred. So the rest of the movie, he ends up kidnapping. Well, he kidnaps the one guy. He's a doctor who was a cab driver in disguise. He ends up kidnapping him, putting him through the test. The guy makes it out of the test alive. Then he interrogates him. You don't see the entire interrogation until the end of the movie. And that's what twists everything together very well. That's what I like about these movies. They put the movie together. And they almost kind of Tarantino it in a way, but in reverse. It's a reverse Tarantino. They take you through the movie. And then you're led in a kind of confusing way. You're like, okay, I see what's going on, but it's kind of confusing me a little bit. Then when you get to the end of the movie, the last 5-10 minutes of it, that's when everything starts twisting back around. That's where you get a lot of your explanations start coming in as to what's going on. So after he kidnaps this one guy, he goes out with the help of Amanda and kidnaps the rest of the team involved, everybody else involved, and they trap him in one big room. And he's in full glory, too. Him and Amanda, they're in full glory. So they explains to them why he's doing it. He knows about the botched surgery, but he tells them all, I'm going to give you all a second chance to live. You all each got a certain test to pass. If you pass the test, you'll get out of here. You'll be on a new lease of life, basically. Now, the traps in the movie, they don't seem too worthwhile. They seem kind of dull and boring in a sense to some people. But like I said, you got to put yourself into the movie where it's located at. It's between the first and the second movie. So the traps are not going to be fancy. They're not going to be big. They're not going to be spectacular. This is John Kramer, very early John Kramer. There are some tests, some of them you really feel for some of these, victims in a sense. One of them is a young girl where she gets strung up by one arm and one leg, opposite each of the side of the body. And she's held up in the air. And John has this giant UV or radiation gun up in the air. And she's got to sever or find a way out of the shackles so that this thing doesn't burn her alive. That's a unique trap. Whereas with another trap, guy comes in in a wheelchair, And he's got this thing around his head. He's got to do something specific or he ends up being burned alive. And the helmet that he's wearing, it's not a bear trap, but it's something very interesting. And I really like seeing that. Something new and interesting. So then there's this one guy that comes along who's part of the whole gag. He ends up playing a part of, oh, well, they botched my surgery too. They took my money. I want to see something happen. But it turns out to be one big gotcha moment where things happen to take a turn for the worst in a sense. To where John ends up letting go the last remaining victim from the trap. That's what ends up happening. So then the tables turn. So then they turn the tables on John and Amanda. So throughout this movie, even though you want to sympathize with the victims, you sympathize more with John Kramer. And of course, Amanda as well. So when the tables turn in the end, something ends up happening. I'm not going to spoil that for you guys. But I will say that John and Amanda do end up coming out alive. They do make it out of the traps alive. And the last two remaining people are dealt with in a very not grotesque way, but in a unique way that's like, okay, they're dead. That's it. Said and done. And then of course there's a scene, a mid-credit scene that I had to look up on YouTube. That shows Mark Hoffman, police officer Mark Hoffman, make a return. And it has something to do with a victim, of course. And it's a matter of revenge. So it's John and Mark Hoffman working together. So here is where you find out that John has been working with or siding with Mark Hoffman all along. So that ties that plot together. It's like, how does Mark Hoffman, the detective, from Saw 3 on up, how does he fit in the whole category? How does he fit into the whole franchise? He's been working alongside John the whole time. But there's another continuity error there. A whole other continuity error. Because in Saw 3D, Saw 7, the last Saw before everything else went haywire, he ended up going after John Kramer's wife. And ended up killing her too. But then, he ended up meeting his maker in the end as well. By Carrie Elway's character. That's in part 7. So, this movie here, it has a good story to it. That's how I explained it. Saw X has a really good story that fits very well in between the first two movies. It does it very well. You feel for John in a certain way, not just as a jigsaw killer, but you feel for this man who's got a reason for doing what he's doing. And then he gets duped in the end. So then he takes his revenge out on the people that tried to screw him. And everything works out. So where it looks like everything goes downhill, everything twists on him, everything twists right back. So this is a movie that has a double twist to it, I will say. You got a twist that comes in within the last 10 minutes of the movie. And then you got another twist that twists right back around. And it's very cleverly done. And I was smirking the last 5 minutes of the movie. I'm sitting there rooting for Jigsaw, I'm rooting for John because I sympathize with his character. But then something happens with him. I'm like, I know he's going to get out of it. I know he's going to get out of this situation. Because he's in the next two movies. So it's like, you already know something's going to happen where he's going to end up freed himself from this trap, He's going to end up freeing himself. And it ends up happening. But this movie, it's very clever with how it tells the story, with how it fits the story into the storyline. It does it very cleverly. But like I said, there's at least two things wrong with it for me. And they're both the same, basically. And that is the continuity error with two separate characters. You got Amanda Young, Shawnee Smith, Amanda Young. Her character revives in this movie. So it's like, okay, she's the protege. But then when you hit Saw 2, and everybody already knows with Saw 2, it's like, well, she's the victim in the movie. But then you find out, when it comes to Saw 3, she has been Jigsaw's apprentice all along. So I don't know if you can call that a continuity error at this point or not, but that's what it is to me. And then you got Costas Mandylor, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, who plays Mark Hoffman, the detective in Saw 3 on up, makes his grand appearance. Surprise cameo in the credit scene. So he's been working with Jigsaw all along. There's another continuity error right there, but it does also fit in the story where, okay, he has been working with John Kramer all along. That makes sense. He's not just a copycat killer, but he's somebody who has taken the place. But why? You never find out why. You just know he's a copycat killer. He's doing everything that John Kramer does. He sets up everything that John Kramer sets up in the other movies. So there may be a couple things wrong with the movie right there. But that's my opinion. And I think anybody who watches this movie will have a different opinion about it. Right now, this movie sits on Rotten Tomatoes at an 83% rating. This is the highest rated movie in the franchise. The best in the franchise since the first Saw. Now, I did enjoy them all for what they are. Yes, they kind of went downhill in a sense a little bit with each different entry in the movie in the franchise. But every movie is very interesting in every way. Now, for the website from Rotten Tomatoes, the website's consensus reads, led by a franchise best performance by Tobin Bell, Saw X reinvigorates the series with an installment that has a surprising amount of heart to go with all the gore. For Rarities, Owen Gleiberman wrote that Saw X seems more like a real movie than many of the films in the series, and that there's more talking and less torturing. He was satisfied with the ratio, but was concerned it would pay off, or if it would pay off at the box office. He explained that the torture set pieces in the Saw films are a lavish gift of Baroque horror presented to the audience. They are quite simply the reason they came. He gave particular praise to Tobin Bell with his stare of pitiless wisdom. There's really nothing much more I could say. Like, this is coming from a lot of different critics of the movie. Even this woman for the New York Times, she called Saw X the most well-groomed Saw film to date. She continued with, the story mostly makes sense. And Gru Tort, I guess that's the director of the film, I guess, pulls back on the frenetic editing techniques that made the older movies look like the blood and guts equivalent of white noise. So yeah, the director of this movie, he did a very good job with what he was going for. He really did. This movie has more story to it. It's more of a story than a gore fest. You're not mostly coming here for the traps. There are traps, but I will say this movie really passes the stage. It really passes the test of time with the franchise as being the best entry in the entire franchise. You shouldn't really base it off of, I'm going there to see the traps. I want to see the victims, get cut up in different ways. It's not about that. The movie's about a character who you can now sympathize with as to why he's doing what he does. And that's why I love this movie. That's why I like Saw X. There's a lot of things I like about it. There's a couple things I can probably argue with, but then somebody else will come up and say something better about it and be like, well, that's because of this and this and that. Then I can probably see where they're getting at with it. So Saw X, have you seen this movie yet? Have you gotten around to see it yet? It is definitely worth playing. It's definitely worth seeing. I give Saw X 8.5. 8.5 out of 10. I could probably go for the whole 9. But I'm going to go with 8.5 for now. So guys, what do you think about Saw X? Have you finally seen this movie yet? It is out right now, out in time for the Halloween season. If it's Halloween, it must be Saw. Let me know down in the comment section. What do you guys think of this movie? And that is the end today of today's episode 7 of Cinemacast. Thank you guys for dealing with my raspy voice. Like I said, I'm getting over laryngitis, getting over this cold. It's hard. I'm trying. If you guys want updates on anything else that we're doing in the future or when we're doing it, follow us on social media. All the links down below in the description section. Be sure you also follow us on twitch.tv/Arrow with a name and kick.com/Arrow Entertainment. We are going to be starting to stream on there really soon as well. So we'll have different platforms and streams going on at once. Also, hit that like, subscribe button down below if you have yet to do so for this channel. Thank you guys so much for the love. Thank you so much for the support. And until next time, guys, we'll catch you right back here at the cinema.